Hi there, this is Willie. I'm going to go over a relatively involved spreadsheet for practice, and this is going to touch on many different philosophies and formulas and some other things. The main key here, though, is about Vlookup and when to use it, why to use it, why not to use it, and also just some data management rules that are helpful to use. So let's get started. I get a relatively simple spreadsheet here. Now, again, I've done this on purpose in terms of like kind of philosophically how we would organize data. This over here on the left is what we sometimes call transactional data, meaning there's multiple items per person or per entity. It's often shown by date, like purchases per date or sales per date. Here it's going to be per person. Again, this is just made up data. But the first thing to notice here is that this is not a summary of donations by people. The reason we can see that is Matt here is there twice, so is Brad. Now, the goal here is for us to make a summary report from transactional data. Now, I've outlined some of these tables here, but generally you wouldn't be given the headers and everything. It might just say, hey, summarize this data. So let's get into this, and I'm going to also break one of my rules here for the simplicity of use is that I'm going to put my summary data on the same sheet as the transactional data, which I would normally not do. I would have them on their own sheet so they're easy to print and look at without looking at the actual data. But in this case, we're going to break that rule and keep it here. But when I do that, I'm going to also separate my transactional data from my summary data by using some visual cues. So I like to just put a little stripe here. I'm also going to have another report over here. And this way I can at least separate visually the transactional data from the different summary tables. That's just kind of a thought I always do. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to save this as a backup just so I can have my original. So we're going to make some summary data here. Now, when I do this in class, I'm going to start off doing this the wrong way because I want to kind of teach some lessons. But in this case, I'm going to do this a little bit faster since it's on a video. But let's look at these few headers here. And we have to notice a few things. And that's important, is noticing what kind of data you're looking at. Supposing this is the data I want in my summary table, like when people donate. Maybe this is for a mail merge. I have to realize what data I have and where that data lives and how would I get it. So let's look at a couple things because they're right here, like a donation. Okay, great. I see Matt there. I know Matt's in here twice. There he is right there. So I need a donation. I also need his graduation year, which is right over here. So let's start with those two things. And I'm going to start over here with graduation year. And this is where we get to our main function that we're going to be talking about is Vlookup. One of the most important and vital functions there is in Excel, used all the time. I'm not going to touch on XLOOKUP, maybe very briefly, but that is the new version, only available in Microsoft 365, and I believe it just got entered into Google Sheets, so maybe more on that later. Graduation year, if I want to look up, and again, let's imagine that this table is not 16 rows, but 16,000 rows. So if I want to look up Kevin, and we're going to assume that everybody has different first names, which is a bad assumption, but we're going to roll with it here. I want to look up Kevin's graduation year. And again, this table at the moment is very easy to do it, but if it was 16,000 rows, this would be very difficult. So I use a function called Vlookup. And Vlookup takes 4 parameters. The first is, what is it that I'm looking up? Okay, and I also sometimes call this the dictionary function. This is I have a dictionary, I want to look something up. So what word am I looking up? I'm looking up the word Kevin, comma. Then it says table array. So what array of data am I looking up Kevin in? What's the dictionary? Now, one huge caveat here, folks. The biggest limitation of Vlookup is this. The value that you're looking up must be the leftmost column of your data. Okay, let me say that again. The value you are looking up, Kevin, must be the leftmost value of your table. In other words, the table that I put in the second parameter, BD, is only going to look up Kevin in B, in this leftmost column. So the value you are looking up must be the leftmost in the leftmost column of your data. Now, in this table, you can see this orangish pink table I have here. Which column do I want returned? The first column, the second column, or the third column? And yes, that does mean that if, for example, you had 20 columns and the graduation year is in the very last one, you would put 20. In this case, I'm going to have 3, the third column. Now, for reasons I'm not going to get into here, I have always used a 0 at the end of VLOOKUP because never do I want an approximate match. So, and also the approximate match only works if it's sorted. Don't use it. VLOOKUP always ends in 0. Great. Well, that worked swimmingly. Now, I do a little drag here, and I've got a problem. 3 of my values don't work. Now, and this is really for 2 different reasons. Now, in the class, I'm going to pause and say, how can we fix these? And it's not an Excel problem. The problem here is data. Is that Jennifer is probably Jen. So my table here didn't have the name that I wanted. So I'm going to fix that, and that's a pretty common problem. And if for example, the difference between legal names and preferred names happens all the time, you really have to do a lot of work to make sure those are synced up. Because it's not that Jen hadn't graduated or didn't donate; it's that they're just not in the data. That the name was spelled differently. These 2 fellas, Willie and Susan, get an error because they literally weren't found in the data set. Now, VLOOKUP, annoyingly, throws an error if it doesn't find what it's looking for. So we're going to solve that problem. Often when you use VLOOKUP, you're going to wrap it in an if error. And if error basically says, do this thing, and if there's a problem, show something else. In this case, I'm going to say, I'm just going to put quote, quote for blank. But I could also say not available, quote. Maybe I'll put that just for purposes here. Write that down. Not available. Great. Now that worked out well. That's VLOOKUP. Notice that every person has exactly 1 graduation year. If for some reason they had multiple graduation years, this isn't going to work. First of all, that's confusing. But if you look up something, for example, the mileage that they drove every day, that's why we cannot use VLOOKUP on donations. Because VLOOKUP only returns the topmost value. It only returns one thing. It's like a dictionary. It's going to return the first thing it finds in that dictionary, nothing below it. Now, donation, you would think is very similar in that it looks up a value and returns the value to the right of it, but it's not. Because what you want to do here is add together values, not look them up like in a dictionary. So that's why we're going to use the function SUMIF. SUMIF says, give me the range to search, B. Give me the criteria to search for, Kevin. And tell me the range which you want to add together. Now, this is confusing to some folks, but we're not adding the names Kevin, John, Carrie. What we want to do is add the values in the row where Kevin is found. So look down this range and add anything that matches. So what it's going to do is it's going to search down here and look at, and let me hit return, then I'll go back to this. It's going to search down here and say Kevin, B10, add 985. So it knows to stay on the same row for each sum. So just to highlight Matt here, it searches down and says, Matt, 15,000. Okay, keep searching, Matt, 100. Add those 2 numbers together, and it'll do that all the way down the column. Okay, great. So now we have donations and we have graduation year. So I'm going to pause there before we kind of get into the next step here, because I want to break these into some little bit. That was almost 10 minutes. And part of this, we did some data organization, we did a VLOOKUP, we did a sum. The next challenge here is going to be some data organization to get the rest of this to work. Now, we may or may not have noticed that the rest of this data lives on this other sheet. So that will be the next video.